Hey, this is Brian from Crazy Good Turns, and we just wanted to say, man, you folks are good-looking people. And you're great writers, too. At least those are our team's thoughts after seeing all the photos and stories you've been posting in the hashtag GratefulGram Challenge. What's the GratefulGram Challenge? It's simple. Before you post your next selfie on social media, put up a photo of someone you feel grateful for instead. Tell why you feel thankful, and hashtag the post GratefulGram. That's all one word, no spaces. Publish it on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter, and then tag a couple of friends and tell them to join too. So many of you have put up so many delightful posts since the campaign went live a few weeks ago. Launchpad founder Kenny Hill was putting up like a new one per day at one point. We see you, Kenny, and you look great. Come join the celebration of good with us at hashtag GratefulGram today. So we wanted to start off this week by taking you inside our mailbox. Each week we ask for your input about who we should feature on the show. Here's a recent letter we received from a listener named Jordan Ramsey. Dear Crazy Good Turns, I have listened to every episode of your show as I walk home from work, and your show always helps to uplift me at the end of the day. Okay, we're blushing right now. Anyway, back to Jordan. I wanted to reach out and tell you about an amazing organization called Camp Hope. Camp Hope is a free weekend camp for children ages 5 to 18 in Wisconsin who are all working through the grieving process after a loved one has died. Camp Hope brings children together to learn to laugh and play and have fun again without feeling like they're disrespecting the memory of their loved one. The camp helps children know that they are not alone and that they can show their emotions. What is special about Camp Hope is that 90% of the counselors have experienced a death of a loved one or a close friend themselves. I had the honor of volunteering as a camp counselor this year. My sister, who was 16 years old at the time, passed away when I was 14 years old.
My group was a little bit harder this last camp.
So that's Jordan's voice. She's talking about her most recent experience at Camp Hope during an event held this past May. There, she was working with a group of 10 and 11-year-old girls.
So we had one that she needed a little bit of time to calm down a little bit away from the group. And so she asked to go fishing. And so during her free time, we went down and we fished.
Camp Hope is situated on a lake in central Wisconsin, in an area just northeast of Stevens Point. It's a picturesque setting. The water is deep blue, and it's surrounded by tall green deciduous trees. Jordan, the child, and another camp counselor named Frank stood out on the docks, casting lines into the water.
She completely calmed down, and she was just at peace being out there fishing. We later learned, and she was telling us that she used to fish with her dad, and it was her dad who had passed away. And so getting to be out there on the water with us, fishing, it was something that she was loving to do. She was just the happiest kid.
Jordan says she and the girl formed a bond.
And so then after that, every free time she'd ask, she's like, can we go fishing? And it was really nice because the next day, she'd be like, okay, it's free time. Can I go fishing? And then, can you go with me? And that was something that the fact that she wanted me to go fishing with her as well, sharing that part of her that was really important. And me being the one to go with her to go fishing as well was something that I was a little bit in awe of.
That's just one example of the changes that take place at Camp Hope. In this episode, you'll hear how Jordan and others like her have overcome loss and found peace, and how they're helping other children and adults alike do the same. This is Crazy Good Turns. We tell inspiring stories about people who do amazing things for others. I'm your host, Brian Sabin.
We all wear name tags that have balloons on them, and all the balloons sort of are color-coded and correspond to who died in your life. So if you have a yellow balloon and someone else has a yellow balloon, even if you never talk, you know that the two of you have a shared experience.
This is the voice of Christy Anderson. She's a 29-year-old professional who works in philanthropy. But she's also a board member at Camp Hope, who's been serving as a counselor there for more than 13 years. The first time she set foot on the grounds, however, she was a camper, and she was just 11 years old.
I grew up in Wisconsin Rapids. My dad sold used cars out of the little blue shed at the Chevrolet dealer on the main drag on 8th Street and in that town. And everybody knew him.
Christy was the only child of Dawn Anderson and Kirby Anderson. They were a tight-knit family in a tight-knit community. The family lived in the house that Kirby had grown up in, and Christy remembers that all of her friends wanted to hang out there when she was young.
Often their parents would call and say, "Are you coming home?" Because they would stay for like a week at a time and just never go home. And that meant that my parents were second parents to a lot of my friends. One of my good friends growing up, who is still a good friend of mine, Steffi, struggled with spelling, and so did I. And so if we got A's on our spelling tests, my dad would take us to the Herschel's ice cream down the street, and we would have chocolate milkshakes.
Christy says that her dad was very involved in her life. Kirby coached sports teams and drove her to summer school. The two were together a lot.
He was both this sort of fun-loving, energetic, passionate person, but he was also this deeply empathetic, understanding, loving, caring, compassionate person as well. So that sort of balance made him an awesome dad.
One morning, when Christy was 11 years old, a snowstorm hit. Her dad went out to snowblow the driveway while she and her mom got ready for the day. Christy says she still remembers every detail of what happened next.
He came upstairs and he had sort of like left all of his clothes, like his jacket and his long sleeve shirt and his jeans, in a trail up to the house because he was really hot. So he came up just sort of in his undershirt. And he said, I really don't feel good. And he walked around the bed and laid down and took this very deep and painful sounding gasp for air. And my mom called 911 and told me to go downstairs and get the neighbors. So I ran downstairs and I put my dad's boots on and I ran through the snow. It just snowed. I ran through the snowbanks to my neighbor's house, had them come over. My neighbor and my mom performed CPR on my dad for 20 minutes, 15 minutes till the ambulance got there. But my dad had a massive heart attack, so there wasn't anything that we could have done, should have done differently. That breath was his last, and we all know that now in retrospect.
In the days immediately after, Christy helped her mom with everything she could. Along the way, she had to wrangle with more things that no 11-year-old should ever have to deal with.
You have to make decisions. You have to pick out caskets and music for funerals, and people ask you what you want at the visitation and who's going to speak and all these kinds of things.
Christy remembers feeling uncomfortable and angry during the months that followed. The community of Wisconsin Rapids offered the family a lot of support, but kids at school just couldn't relate. Christy no longer felt like she fit in. She also didn't feel like going through a structured therapy program. So her mom offered her a deal: attend a weekend at Camp Hope or spend 6 weeks in one-on-one counseling.
And I asked her, how long is Camp Hope, or how many days is Camp Hope? And she said 2. And I said, I pick that. My mom and I often do this, tell this story together, because we have always been really close. But when she dropped me off at camp, I was not speaking to her. And I told her that I wasn't going to talk to anybody and that I wasn't going to cry and I wasn't going to do any of the things, but that I would go because I told her that I would. So she dropped me off and she went home. And when she came back to pick me up 2 days later, she describes that I was a totally different kid. She says she picked her daughter back up from camp.
Christy says she doesn't remember anything at all from her weekend as a camper, but she knows she came back changed. Within 5 years, she returned to Camp Hope to be a counselor, and she's gone back there nearly every year since.
I always have a balloon that represents my dad, and without fail, every camp someone comes up to me and says, you have a red balloon or you have a yellow balloon. Did your dad die? And my answer is always, yep, my dad died when I was 11. And whoever I am sharing that experience with, and I have a moment where we get to talk about things. Sometimes we share dreams that we remember of our dads. But I think that is something that I always look forward to, that moment when I'm able to connect with a camper who shares a specific story with me about their parent.
Christy isn't the only regular at Camp Hope. Somewhere between 40 and 80 volunteers show up to staff each event. Many have been returning to Camp Hope since it was first launched in 1989. The retreat was founded that year by Marty and Becky Loy. They'd lost their daughter, Sarah Margaret, at birth. Their idea was to give grieving families and children a hand in getting through the toughest of times. Children who attend Camp Hope get to experience fun and games, along with some more serious stuff too.
The schedule is organized then between some physical activity, so doing things like swimming, boating, playing basketball, football, that kind of thing. It's intermixed with sharing activities so that we don't bulk up all of the kind of intense times where there might be some crying and just maybe some negative feelings, things that we can then get the kids to go run it off afterwards. So we really make sure to kind of break that up some.
That is Mariah Singer Brown. She took over as director of Camp Hope in 2015 when the Loy family stepped away. Mariah grew up about 20 minutes from the camp in a little town called Iola. She later moved to Minneapolis to work at an ad agency. That's where she met her first husband, Greg. The two returned to Wisconsin to start a family, and they had 2 girls, Holly and Hazel. When Holly was 4 and Hazel was 2, Greg came down with a bad stomachache.
We thought maybe he just had too many slices of greasy pizza, but it turned out that the stomach ache didn't go away. It was a few weeks of testing before we found out he had stage 4 lung cancer.
That stomachache first appeared in February of 2013. By May of that year, Greg was gone.
The night that Greg died, we had been honest with the girls about what was happening and that Daddy had cancer and Daddy was going to be dying soon. That was a really hard conversation to have with them because at their ages, having to say those words out loud to them was hard enough, but then having to explain to them what death even means was another step that we had to go through. Before I put the girls to bed, we had them come up to Greg and he gave them a little box, a little butterfly box that was filled with kisses that would last them their entire lives, kisses from Daddy. And they still have those boxes. But as I took them down to tuck them in, Hazel was only 2, but Holly was 4. And I told her, Holly, we've known that Daddy is really, really sick and that he's going to die, and it's probably going to be really soon now. And she asked me, Mama, is Daddy going to die tonight? And I said, I don't know, baby, but he might. She rolled over and she snuggled her teddy bear that he had given to her, and she went to sleep. And he did die that night.
As you can imagine, the loss was devastating. The void was ever present and impossible to fill. But Mariah says that slowly, light began to creep back in.
There's a part about death and grief that it's hidden, right? You go to, I was having to go everywhere with my 2 young daughters, to the grocery store or to swimming lessons. You strike up conversations with people. I would always share almost immediately that my husband just died, because what I found was that, 1, I needed people to be gentle with me. I needed them to know, because I didn't want to have my child throwing a tantrum on the floor and somebody looking at me like, why aren't you doing anything about it? Or just not knowing the struggles that we were going through just as a family. So I would, number 1, share my story with them, but also number 2, allow them to share their stories with me. And what happened then was that my relationships with people became so much deeper, a lot more quickly. And that's something that's I see at Camp Hope as well, is that when we share our stories right away and we share that little piece of our hearts with strangers, it cuts through so much.
Mariah had known about Camp Hope. In fact, Mariah's own mom had been a volunteer counselor there when she was a teenager.
Her dad had died when she was 14 years old, and he was age 46, which is the same age as my husband when he died at 46. My grandpa's name was Kenneth, and Greg's middle name was Kenneth. I like those connections.
But Mariah wasn't ready to jump in and ask for help. She wanted to have time to process on her own. Ultimately, it was a conversation with her daughter, Holly, that made her feel the family needed something more.
A year later, when we were talking about that night at dinner, Holly asked me, Mama, do you remember what I asked you if Daddy was going to die that night? And I said, yeah, I remember that. I'm surprised you remember that a year later. And she said, I think I'll wish that I had never said that, because I'll think that that's what made Daddy die. And it was at that moment that I realized, that I had given the girls an outlet within our family and our friends to express their grief and share their feelings. But they hadn't been able to meet anyone else in their daily lives, in their preschool class, or, kids their age who had also experienced something like this, who knew what those feelings were like, and as a 5-year-old, she was telling me that she felt guilty about her dad dying.
So in 2014, Mariah and Holly pulled into the campgrounds at Rochelle, Wisconsin, for one of the 3 weekend retreats Camp Hope hosts each year. One of the things that makes Camp Hope special is that both parents and kids can attend, but they do so at separate camps. The kids go off to the kids' campground, where they bunk up with other children the same age and gender. The parents go to another area, where they spend the weekend in programs designed to help them deal with their needs.
I was blown away by just how much I needed that time. One of the first things that we did was a drumming session. The drummer that we bring in, his name is Bill Keel, and he's a wonderful person. He incorporates a lot of just movement and feelings and going around and letting people feel how they feel and talk about that, incorporating that with drumming. And the biggest thing that I remember from that was throughout Greg's illness, we were never angry. This is strange to me because I never really went through an anger stage of grief, and I know everyone grieves differently. Greg was never that angry. He always just wanted to make the most of the time he had, and in some ways, he treated the time when he was sick as a way to teach others how to live their best lives and appreciate life. And so I felt like that first drumming session, because I was wearing Greg's wedding ring on my middle finger on my right hand because that's where it fit my hand. And I still wear it even now, even though I'm remarried and I have a wedding ring on my other hand. But at that drumming session, my hand was starting to hurt because I was drumming so hard and that ring was digging into my hand. And I realized that there was a little bit of anger in there.
Both Holly and Mariah had a lot of fun and experienced a lot of healing that weekend. So later, Mariah reached out to the Loy family and asked how she could get involved. The family was impressed by Mariah's experience as a marketer and a public speaker, and ultimately decided to pass on the duties directing the camp to her. She took over a year after she attended. This past May, the camp where Jordan Ramsey served as a counselor was the largest event yet that Mariah has overseen at Camp Hope, with more than 70 kids attending. Most of those children hail from Wisconsin or the Midwest, but the camp is open to all, and it's free for any grieving family to attend.
It's a big deal to be able to offer camp for free to families, and it's a lot of work to do that. But we feel that, sometimes it's hard enough for families to even show up to camp, to leave jobs, pets, obligations at home, even for a weekend. Not only that, but also the emotional aspect of it. It's kind of a hard thing for people to do. It's a place where they know they're going to have to share a little bit, and that can be really scary. And so having any kind of fee involved, we just feel we don't want that associated at all. And so we've worked really hard to make it free and continue to make it free.
Mariah's vision for the camp is one that's more about depth than scale. They aren't looking to grow. Instead, the goal is to form a strong community.
I feel like I should say that we need to expand and we need to get bigger and we need to bring more people in. But I am of the feeling that the reason that Camp Hope is so impactful is because it stays small.
Here's how Jordan describes that impact.
So it's a pretty magical place.
Unlike the other guests, Jordan never attended Camp Hope as a camper. She grew up in a suburb of Seattle. When her sister, Erin, died of heart complications, Jordan remembers feeling angry and out of place until she attended a camp for grieving kids in Colorado. Jordan recently moved to Madison to attend the University of Wisconsin. And this year, despite being a busy graduate student, Jordan decided that now was the right time to start giving back.
I first pulled into the camp. I walked over to the dining hall, and I was greeted by Mariah. And I told her who I was, and she said, "Oh, yeah, I'm so excited that you're here." Everyone just made me feel included.
Jordan went to the camp to help other kids deal with their emotions, but the experience proved to be cathartic for her as well.
I didn't know a lot of people growing up that had lost a sibling or lost a sibling in a manner that I had. So when I first came to Camp Hope, I ended up meeting someone who had lost a sister in a similar manner as me in a medical way, and similar ages. And I ended up talking with this person for about an hour, just understanding. We got to talk about, how did we feel? How did our dynamics change in the family? How do we react to different questions that we get asked? Getting to talk about it with other people who get it, and who, it might bring up other things that you haven't felt in a long time, but it's important to feel those emotions and to feel it with other people who understand as well.
And in those conversations, Jordan says, you can find strength and peace. Thanks for listening to this episode of our podcast. Go to crazygoodturns.org to learn more about Camp Hope and the people behind it. We'll also have a link there where you can donate. You can submit your ideas for people or organizations we should feature on an upcoming episode by emailing us at hello@crazygoodturns.org. Stay connected with us between shows by following us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at /crazygoodturns. And give us an @ when you post your next Gratefulgram. Our show is audio engineered by Stephen Key. Music supervision and mixing provided by Score in Los Angeles. A special thanks goes to Megan Hamlin, and I'm your host, Brian Sabin.
I think that our goal is to help kids understand that there is life after death, and there is lots to live for and to experience and to journey through. And it doesn't mean that you have to let go of the person who died or leave them behind. You get to bring them with you in a different way.